Hello, good afternoon, morning, good night to everyone. Welcome to our Hebrew Insights into Revelation, our free online conference from the Israel Bible Center in September. We are so happy to have everyone here. I can see we have people from El Salvador and Malaysia, Austria, Canada, Kenya, South Africa, Brazil, US. I mean, you name it, we have a lot of countries around, and we are very, very happy to have everyone here. So today we have a very quite exciting topic. I think Revelation is one of the texts that brings more people in and that grabs the interest of people. And with me today, if you are regular, you may notice I'm not Shaya, who is usually hosting with us. So my name is Tupa. I'm professor of ancient studies in the Israel Bible Center. And with me today, I have Eli. Say hi. And Pinhas. Nice. And to start with, we had a very interesting poll running to ask you guys, did you know that Revelation is the only book in the New Testament that used the word Alleluia? Yes? No? Well, so how many times it appears? And I see that the majority of people said more than 5 times, which is very close to the answer, which is 4 times. And it's so interesting to see how words and how they present and how they appear in the books, and also how we perceive them and how we think of them in the books. But let's dive into Revelation properly. I would want to start with to ask you guys, because for me, Revelation was a book that really grabbed my attention the first time. And I think the first time I saw it and the imagery and everything. So I would want to, like, from you, what was the first memory you have, and how did this grab your attention?
I'll go. For me, Revelation, the first time I've actually heard about it, was kind of one of those scary images, I think, for everybody else. I didn't really know much about it before I started studying things like that. And to me, I just had a very pop culture view of Revelation. You know, the things that you hear about, the end of the world stuff, and I really did not know what to make of it. It was just one of those mysterious things. And so later on in my life, as I ventured into biblical studies, I read the book for myself and discovered its beauty. And so since then, I've kind of been enamored with it, actually, throughout my life, going back and forth with it and interacting with that book. I find it to be an extremely deep book, very mysterious, even though I have been studying it for a long time. There's still so many questions that I have of it that I can't possibly answer. Yet there are some secrets, sort of say, that have been opened up to me, and today I see things so much clearer, having spent enough time poring over its text, and so I have a lot of fun teaching Revelation as well. So I've been doing that for years, and it's helping to sort of say open other people's eyes for just like I was at some point, not to be scared of the book, not to think anything, like this is, something terrible or awful. It is a very beautiful and multifaceted book that's how I've experienced it today.
First of all, hello, everyone. The first time like Pinchas, actually, I also grew up in the former Soviet Union, so we had some similar upbringing. My mother bought her first Bible in the black market. I didn't know what the black market was at the time, but I remember when I must have been like 11 years old, and she brought a Bible home. And of course, this was forbidden. And but there was also always a Bible at my home when I was growing up. And so when the parents weren't home, and I would explore the family library, which wasn't huge, but it had everything from Mark Twain to Tolstoy and Dostoevsky and books like this. And my mother always read the Bible. So I remember reading through the Gospels, and I remember always getting to the point of the crucifixion of Jesus. This was a very painful thing. I remember I always skipped that part to get to further things. And then, of course, in the book of Revelation, I also was fascinated, the parts of it that I was able to read at the time, of about this flying dragons and rivers and earthquakes and trumpets and it's just a truly a fascinating book. And I think as the way it was the case with Pinchas, I also thought for many years, and I actually would say this to people when they would just ask me, what's the Bible all about? And I'll say, well, the first part is the Torah, the first 5 books of Moses. And then, so I would go through different things and I would say, and this is about what was happening with Jesus, with the gospel. And then I'll say, and that's what would happen in the future when I talk about the book of Revelation. Now, of course, in time, I realized that my former approach, that Revelation is basically only about the future, was faulty. Because there are things in the book of Revelation that are not about the future. They were not even about the present of people for whom the book of Revelation was written. Some of the things there are actually about the past. Some of the visions are, for example, a dragon standing and trying to devour a male child who's supposed to rule the nations, right? That's referring to the past. It's referring to actually the birth of Jesus. Of course, it's unclear who the woman is, but in any case, it's in the past, right? It's not in the future, nor is it in the present for the book. So, anyways, this is just a short observation to answer to your question about how did we first, encounter the book of Revelation.
Yeah, I think. So for me, it was the book of Revelation was very much, I encountered very much from pop culture and all the references in pop culture. And it was always fascinating to see all the imagery and how it was a bit of a horrible thing. And at the same time, it was interesting. And my first language is Portuguese. And in Portuguese, it's not translated as Revelation. It's translated as Apocalipse. So the book is called Apocalypse. And I remember when I was at the university and I first learned that Apocalypse wasn't the end of the world, because I was like, wait, isn't Apocalypse the same as the end of the world? Oh, wait, there is a whole literary genre about apocalypses. This like blowed my mind. And that's why I think Revelation was always, and also when I first saw it in English and I was like, wait, they do translate it as Revelation? Wow, this is amazing. So
when you finish, I remembered one small thing I wanted to add. Go ahead, finish, and then you could give me like one tiny thing to add.
Yes, I will. But yeah, that was mostly how, so it really got to me like how, well, the whole thing about how translation shapes a lot of what we know about books and how we understand things. But also how interesting it is to understand the book and in its context, and how it's interesting to understand the history of the book. And I'll get to you back. Go on, Eli.
Oh, I was just going to say that at some point when I just became the bona fide believer, it was actually I lived in Ukraine at that time, in Odessa, Ukraine. And Jews for Jesus, a missionary organization came, and it was at the time of Perestroika. They came to Ukraine, like in all other republics of the former Soviet Union, to talk about Jesus and the Jewishness of Jesus. So I started to go to the Bible studies. And I remember the first time I heard this preacher, Avi Snyder, preach, who was a very, very talented guy, and he still is. Perhaps some of you may be aware of him. But in any case, I remember I came to him in the first after his talk, and I said, but it doesn't seem that the God of the Bible is the same in the Old Testament, so-called, and the New Testament, because in the Old Testament we have a lot of wrath of God, a lot of judgment. And in the New Testament, we encounter God's mercy and grace and all those things. And he looked at me, he says, well, look, first of all, you have to read the Torah. You have to read it more carefully because there's so much mercy and grace there that it's unbelievable. And then he says, you have to read the book of Revelation, because the book of Revelation is, of course, there's mercy and grace also there, right? But there's so much judgment that it's not even funny. So if you're going to make a claim that, anyways, by the way, I just want to mention, some of you already started using this. There is, in the Zoom, you're allowed to use reactions. That really helps us. So if you really liked what we said, you could do the hearts, the like that, or if you didn't like, you can say boo, something like that. It would help us. Oh, thank you. Oh, all these hearts. I love you.
Hearts falling there.
Yeah,
yeah,
we
it's
love
really
you
nice
too.
to see the hearts and everything.
Love is coming our way.
Oh. So, but if we're already started, of course, but if we're going to start to understand Revelation, I know Pinchas has a lot to say and a very interesting way to look at the main points in the book. So,
Sure. I mentioned that, Ella and I actually do have a couple of courses in Revelation, so we put it together, and we teach all the time to students the same sort of ideas and concepts usually come up. So what I've done is I've put together a little synopsis, a little summary of just, what are the main things to know about reading Revelation, how we should read it, how we should approach it. Because the truth is, every book in the Bible is unique, okay? And Revelation, I think, stands out of all of them completely. It is so multifaceted. When we read, Apostle Paul, it's a letter. It's a correspondence. He sends something to his disciples. He wants to teach. He wants to explain. He wants to correct some problem or give him some good advice, right? As a teacher would give to a student, a disciple, sort of say, a relationship. And so that makes sense to us. It's easier to understand. I'm reading somebody else's mail, okay? But when I'm reading Revelation, it's completely different. And there are aspects of Revelation that I think people miss, because they think, well, every book in the Bible is like the same. It's the Bible, right? Same author, everything is the same. Well, actually, it is not. It's so different. It's not like reading Paul. It's not like reading the Gospels. It's not like reading the prophets. It's not like reading Torah. You can't just say, all right, reading Psalms, reading Revelation, same thing. No. They are such different books. So I wanted to share just a few insights with you about how Revelation should be read. So the first point that I wanted to make is that Revelation is a traditional Jewish apocalyptical text. Okay, now that's a big statement. Probably everything needs to be unpacked, but I will just simply say that it speaks to readers through symbols, through heavenly visions, through cultural images and codes that are aimed at the insider audience. And the truth is, we are not the insider audience. The ancient people to whom these words were addressed, they are the insiders. And so we're kind of on the outside looking in. And a lot of times as we read it, it makes no sense to us. If you've ever been baffled by reading Revelation, this is the reason why. You're not an insider. So it's hard for us, and we have to try to become the insiders. But that's a long process. So it's a traditional Jewish apocalyptical style text that speaks in a very specific way that we are not always used to, unless we are in custom of reading that type of literature, apocalyptic literature. The second point is that Revelation actually expresses quite a bit of anti-Roman sentiments. And this is something that most of us, again, have a hard time identifying with. Unless you can imagine what it's like living under the crushing power of mighty Roman Empire and being a minority group that are being persecuted, it's hard to identify with that. So yes, Revelation has a lot of anti-Roman language, and sometimes we may read that language from our own perspective, from our own context, but really it's against the empire. It deals with all of the polemics against paganism of the Roman Empire versus the monotheistic, sort of say, ethical system that the Jewish scriptures present. And so they're pitted up against each other. And of course, you understand in that battle, the pagans turn out to be very bad. So those are the first 2 points. The next, if you can advance the slide, point that I wanted to bring up.
Can I just add one small thing? If you can just go back to the previous slide, and I'm sure you mean to say that it's just again in the short thing. It's hard sort of to choose what to say, what to omit. So I think that when we think of this as an anti-Roman document, we have to. It's crucial that we say that it's Jewish anti-Roman document.
Right.
It's not just anti-Roman document. It's a very Jewish anti-Roman document, Judaic, whichever way you want to specify that. I'll just leave it there. You and I.
I think you're right. I mean, we agree on this. I'm trying to say this concisely as I can to kind of give people a big overview. Yes, very pro-Jewish, very anti-Roman document.
Exactly.
Good point. All right, let's go to point number 3. So another point to keep in mind as you read Revelation, and if you don't fully grasp it, you're going to miss things in Revelation. Revelation is a real letter. It's a public message. It is a letter that's meant to be read out loud, and it's written to historical assemblies of Christ followers who are undergoing persecution. And a lot of times we read the Bible and we think it's written to us, like we are the readers, we're the audience. And that's fine. I think that's a good way to read the Bible. But the truth is, there's also the original audience. There are people to whom this message was addressed, and it was to them personally. And there are some things in there that are probably unique and personal specifically for them. And so we can't lose sight of that aspect. It is a letter. At least the front part of the message is very much reads like a letter. And so we are reading that. Point number 4 is that Revelation is also a prophetic message. And prophetic messages, sometimes people tend to mistake prophecy just for being foretelling the future or something like that. Prophecy is not future fortune telling, sort of say, idea. If you read the prophets of Israel, you will realize that the primary purpose is to actually rebuke sin, and also to proclaim some things that might happen in the future. But it really is about criticizing the sin. And Revelation does that. It talks about paganism. It gives warnings about people who are going astray into this direction that they should not move into. But then it also speaks of the rewards of persevering and sticking with the God of Israel and really walking the narrow path and then reaping those rewards. So in that sense, it's very prophetic. And there are aspects of this type of rebuke and consolation. Because if you read the prophets of Israel, that's the double nature of the prophetic speech. There will be rebuke and consolation. Rebuke and consolation. Revelation reads very much like that. And if we read it in that frame of mind, I think a lot of messages become clearer to us. Let me go to the next one. Yeah, go ahead. Jump in.
Before you do that, can I just quickly do just one small caveat? I think on Revelation being the real letter, it's public message to 7 very real historical assemblies. You will hear this from us actually a lot, that the Bible is not written to us. And this is, in a way, could be discouraging, right? Because we always like to think that this is God's letter to us. Now, and in some way it is God's letter to us all, right? But just exactly as Pinchas pointed out, each book of the Bible, sometimes we don't know what was the audience, but rest assured that there was a particular audience for each book of the Bible, particular circumstances, particular they lived in particular location, dealt with particular issues. So now what I wanted to point out though is that it is in the particularity of the biblical message and the biblical audience. There rests the universality of the message. So we think that we're tempted to think the opposite, that if the message is just for, was originally authored for particular kinds of people in particular space and time with particular concerns, then it's less applicable to us that live in a different spot in a different circumstances. But actually, you will see that once you be able to test this. And the book of Revelation is actually case in point to this, that the more you understand how fine-tuned each particular book of the Bible was to its own original audience, the more you'll be able to grasp and apply how it could then be faithfully applied in a universal way to almost everyone else. So that's just one small thing I wanted to add here.
No, I think it's a good point. I think particularism and universalism are always sort of say in our purview as we read the Bible. Yeah, that's awesome.
If I can
Jump in.
if I can jump in, actually, I'm bringing a question from Heidi. Who asks, who wrote Revelation? Since we're talking about to whom is written, so who wrote it?
Ellie, you want to go on that?
I'll yield the floor.
Okay. So the tradition, of course, is John Yochanan, John of Patmos. That's how sometimes people call him, because we actually don't know which John. So we have a tradition with the apostle being identified, and that's been a long-standing. It's a good tradition, but scholars do wonder whether we're talking about the same John or not, because honestly, John is a very common Jewish name, and unless the author identifies himself as I, John the Apostle, write to you, and he just mentions his genealogy or something like that, we don't really know. A lot of the books of the New Testament that we have are actually kind of synonymous, unless we have a letter of Paul that says I, Paul, write to you. Did Matthew really write Matthew? Did Luke did it write like Luke? These are the names we attach to the books by tradition, and that's fine because we do have these traditions. So the best answer that I can give you, I wish I knew for sure, is that John the Apostle, he's credited with writing that book by tradition. Maybe it was someone else. Would it make a difference? I don't think so. I think the book is just as amazing as whether it was written by an apostle or not, because the message is clearly powerful and clearly coming from God, and the way it was received by the community, in the way that they appropriated that message, it shows to me that it has the authority of someone speaking really on behalf of God.
It may sound that Pinchas just said something really heretical, meaning it doesn't really matter if the apostle wrote it or not. But think about the Gospel of Luke, right? We actually don't know who wrote the Gospel of Luke. I hate to break up a party over here, but
you want to be just as heretical as I am, is what you're saying.
Yeah. No, listen. The Gospel according to Mark, Matthew, Luke, all of those things are later additions and the church traditions. Now, they may be good traditions, and I happen to think that more or less they are right. But the point is, and this is what I want to highlight, is that there's many gospels out there that are non-canonical. In other words, they're the ones that never made it into the Bible, right? What's interesting is that all the gospels that made it into the Bible, none of them mention who wrote them. Now, so it says the gospel according to Matt, but that's a later addition. In the text itself, that's actually the ancient text, there is nothing at all. You could see that whoever wrote Luke also wrote Book of Acts, yes, but it's unclear who exactly wrote what we call the Gospel of John. Now, what's interesting is that many of the non-canonical Gospels have a lot of fun with this authorship thing. I, Peter, and I, Philip, and I this, and I that. It's almost like you could tell that they have to do their own PR because they're not the real thing, you see. So this whole idea of the messages of God being written down, perhaps in the name of some very spiritual person, or a lot of times just being anonymous documents. It's actually part of this Israelite prophetic tradition. Okay, but those who come from outside, they're the ones that feel that they need to specify that they're the apostolic figures, you see, to give the weight that they do not really have. So that's just.
No, I mean, there's just a lot of books in the Bible are like that. I mean, that's just the fact, and we just have to accept it for what it is and not fight it, because I think where this preoccupation with who the author is, it really comes from culture, and it, probably is just not the feature of the ancient culture that they had. That's why they didn't put it in those books. They didn't clarify to us who wrote it and when and under what circumstances or anything like that, because to them that was not important. The message itself was important. They did not want to detract perhaps from the message by speaking about themselves per se. I mean, that's what I'm thinking.
Tupac.
If you think historically, this idea of authorship being so important and the person being important, that we need to talk who wrote things, is fairly new in a lot of places in the world. I don't want to say in the whole world because I don't know the whole world. But of course, when we think about that, it was way more common to give importance to the text itself, or the group of people, or the city, and not necessarily to the person as an individual, because the individual wasn't that important. The community was more important.
Mm-hmm.
So that's also something we need to think, especially when we understand ancient cultures and when we think about those texts. And of course, go on.
No, sorry, I'm interrupting you. Go ahead, finish.
No, I was only going to say also that sometimes it's fairly common to mention the place, because also the place was part of the identity. We kind of have this too, but not in the same weight as it was in ancient times, because in ancient times you would be very much connected to your community, as the sense of individuality was not the same as we use today. So that's also interesting. And as we're saying, like, although those texts were written we can see the message as humanity, they have a lot of different angles and a lot of different things that will be interesting to people who read it in ancient times than it is for us.
I mean, not to belabor the point too much, but we do know that it was written by John. We just don't know which one.
We just don't know which one.
That's
exactly
the point, right? We do know that that he was probably under house arrest, not jailed, as we usually think about the island of
Patmos. Or perhaps exiled.
Exile,
people would
probably exiled. Exactly.
You guys have to understand. I was born and raised in Siberia. I know very well about this idea of exile. It's a jail without walls, essentially. Okay, you have to understand.
Right. I actually misspoke when I said house arrest. What I meant to say that it wasn't exactly jail, but actually I was not clear enough. You're right. Because you're right. It's more like of being exiled somewhere that you cannot. That you can't leave, which, by the way, could explain at some point, and we'll get to this soon, I assume, this incredible amount of code language that an insider can fairly easily decipher and realize that they're talking about here an anti-government, anti-Rome, in this case Roman, really, what's the word I'm looking for in English? Subversive, really, subversive material that seeks to really overthrow the government, which is really, really scary.
Right. What if we write it in the form of visions and crazy animals and things like that, then in dreams that I saw, then all of a sudden it doesn't sound as threatening.
I mean, look. Whenever you're exiled, and this has been true about all exiles everywhere, I think, is that the people that are exiled, they're not really guilty bad people. They're just dangerous people. They're just considered dangerous by the government, essentially.
Right.
So they're sent out somewhere. People don't really want to make them martyrs, which is why they're still alive, right? They don't want them to become martyrs. So they exile there to have a quiet life that doesn't affect anybody. But that's the case with Solzhenitsyn, and that's the case with so many others who wrote their most powerful works of literature within religious circle and outside of religious circle from these kinds of conditions, and all of them were under the pressure to say things in such a way that their literature would be able to be smuggled through those who would check it on the way out, right? So that's really that. I think that's a concept that we need to think about as a very possible scenario that may explain a lot of this kind of code language that stands for some really serious things, but would mean only that to the insiders.
Right. So if somebody's going to be reading our correspondence, I'm going to make sure and say things in a way that you will understand. But other people who do not know us very well and don't understand our culture and environment would not understand it. It will just sound benign to them. But in reality, I'm laying out some serious things. So,
Pinchas, maybe give an example of this. You want to go to the 666 thing? No?
No, we'll get into that later, perhaps.
Yeah, we'll get it.
I want to finish
Let's
up
go back to
let's
go back to the points.
All
so
right.
we have now number 5.
So number 5 is that Revelation is about first century events. A lot of times, Ellie's already mentioned that, a lot of times people think of Revelation future. Well, actually, a lot of what Revelation says applies to the time and the era in which it's written. So you open Revelation 1:1, and right there it says the things that the author is saying will come to pass very soon. I mean, I don't know how else you can understand very soon except very soon. And then you read chapter 22, verse 6, and it says the same exact thing. It will come to pass very soon. Now, again, I'm not writing about distant future. What he's saying is like, this is now or very soon. And so, yes.
Which, by the way,
that way. Yeah.
By the way, the Bible actually has beautiful ways to talk about some kind of vision being far away in the future, right?
Yeah.
In the book of Daniel, the angel says, now listen, Daniel, what I'm telling you right now, this is not about now. It's not going to take very soon.
Yeah.
Feel it up. This is going to be so far away that it's going to seem irrelevant. But here, it's exactly what you're saying.
Exactly the opposite.
And it's
about to happen. Yeah.
And it's interesting you mentioned that, because we had a question from Mike exactly asking about that. How can we, what does soon means in Revelation, since how can we interpret this? And
I wish we can ask the author who was there what he meant by soon. Like, you mean soon like 15 minutes, or you mean like soon like a couple of months? We don't know, obviously. I mean, obviously this is one of those general remarks that we have to interpret, in a very general way. But what I'm trying to say is that Revelation is about first century events. I mean, we tend to think of Revelation of being written for future, distant, far away, something that's yet to happen. Maybe little bits and parts of it we have out in the fast, but most of it is yet to come, because the end of the world is not here yet. So we must still experience all those scary things, right? So, but what I'm saying is that no, as you read the text, it keeps telling you, pay attention. This has to do with the people right now, and the first century believers have to make sense of it. If the text only is read in the way that it can be understood by modern people living today in the 24th century, then that leaves the original audience completely in the lurch. But yes, wait a minute, he's writing those words to them. So if they don't make sense to them, but they make sense to us, then our interpretation must be way off, way off. It would be cruel for me to send you a message in a letter which you would never be able to decipher, because I encoded it somehow, knowing that it's really not for you, but for your great grandchildren. I mean, that would be pretty freaky.
A lot of medical doctors do that. They write in a way that no one can decipher.
Well, I'm not talking about Van Helsing. Again,
but
I'm talking about the
that's
historical aspect.
And that's the handwriting, not the message necessarily.
Yes, it's the handwriting. It's the
Right,
scribbles.
right.
Yeah.
Right.
You get the idea. So it is about the first century events, but then the other side of it, okay, it is about a future as well. There is a futuristic part of Revelation that we cannot lose sight of. I can't tell you, oh, everything happened in Revelation is just all done and done deal, and it's all happened in the first century. No, it can't be, because obviously there are things in Revelation that clearly talk about judgment and things like that. We know we haven't seen the full judgment of God upon this earth. These are the visions that are being shown to us. And so, yes, some events are presented in that type of a prophetic expectation that these are things yet to come, and the messages that we're supposed to carry away today, we're supposed to heed those warnings once again. But everything a lot of times is focused on the time of hand, yet there's a future aspect. So it's one of those books where you have to really pay attention. Is this about now or is this about later? And sometimes we don't have those answers because they're not that clear. But that's what makes the book of Revelation so enigmatic and so beautiful, because we have to really dig and really force ourselves, so to say, to enter into the context and try to understand, what is the message that we're supposed to carry away? What's the message for the first original audience in the first century? What is the message for us? How does that apply? Is this about future? These are all the questions that continue to fascinate us, which is why we have webinars like this.
Yeah. Pinchas, I want to add one more thing about these 2 points. Is that okay?
Sure, you can add to anything. We can actually go backwards if you want.
Yeah.
No. This is okay. Actually, you folks should know that about Pinchas, this was like 8 years ago, right? We first began to work on the Book of Revelation together, and we kind of have different roles and who's writing what, who's doing what in this. But we've done a lot of work together on this, and at the time we actually made the slides from many years ago. Now, if I were going to do a slide now, I would actually change this a bit. I would actually add that not only, and I brought this up earlier, but now is the time that I want to actually bring it up again. Not only that the Book of Revelation is about the current events at when the letters. This letter of Revelation was sent to this congregation, 7 congregations. Not only is this also about sometime in the future, but actually it's also about the past, which I have to confess I overlooked until recently. I really overlooked that a lot of the Book of Revelation, I don't want to say a lot, but not a lot. Maybe a lot is not a good statement. But there's some texts in the Book of Revelation that actually go back in time and explain what happened before all of this. So it's not it. So the Book of Revelation, on one hand, is about the future. On another hand, it is about the present of the time during the time of writing, which is why it's so heavily Roman Empire oriented. But also, it's about the explaining the events that have already taken place that believers just don't know how to understand. Okay, the battles between Michael the archangel and where he was held up and what was happening, and this was at the same time when the dragon was trying to devour the male child. The birth of Jesus. That's before the Book of Revelation, right? But at least at least sometime. So it's I can't read this quote now because I'm not prepared to. I didn't prepare to read it out to you. But Pinchas and I stumbled on a really excellent quote by someone who said that basically throughout the centuries, interpreters, much like us, looked for the key to how to read and interpret. And only if you know this key, you'll be able to actually get it. But as everyone, no matter who does the interpretation, looks for this kind of key and starts checking it out whether his or her key interpretively is really working, we realize that Book of Revelation defies interpretation. Book of Revelation defies any kind of keys. It defies any kind of categorization. And this is the power and the beauty of God's word through this apocalyptic literature. Is just when our pride rises itself so high up that we will understand, okay, this stands for this, the dragon stands for that, the beast stands for this, and this stands for this, and this is this time, that time, this time. Just when our pride rises up so high to the heaven that we know when everything's going to happen, when we begin to look more carefully, we realize our key doesn't quite fit in a perfect way. And then we're humbled again to listen to the music of heaven.
Yeah, the system just broke down. So when Ellie's talking about the key, what he's really talking about a system, a schema, a pattern, a method, So as scholars, this is what we do. We operate in the world of methodology. We have a method, we have a system, and then we apply a system to interpret something. We sort of say, figure out what fits into what category, what type, and then we say, okay, for that category, we use this system. For that category, we use this system. We're very scientific when it comes to that. But so this is what Ellie's talking about. Revelation defies that. It is such an incredibly multifaceted text that it simply does not want to be interpreted this way and not that way. It just goes back and forth in so many directions that we have to be flexible, and that stretches us a lot of times.
And I think it's also interesting to notice how Revelation can be a lifetime work for a scholar, and the person won't get to everything that has. So it's really a book that you can dedicate your whole life and you won't get to everything. It can bring in all the messages because it has so many layers and so many things. And well, we're just so everyone know, we will try to get to as many questions as we can, but it's impossible to answer all of them. We had more than 80 already, so we try our best, so bear with us. But I was just going to comment on something a lot of people mentioned. It's the fact that if we think about time and how God understands time and how future, present, and past are not necessarily the same line. God doesn't need the line. God doesn't follow and doesn't understand time in the same way as we do. So it also makes sense for a book to have information for the past and present and future, because it's a Revelation book, and it's not only telling us a simple line story, it's telling us also about mysteries, and it's also telling us about other things. So I wanted to bring this.
Tupa, if I could just add just one small thing. Pinchas and I working on the part 2 of the Book of Revelation that we have left off, and now we're continuing. New course is being created all the time, and so now, as I'm sort of pushing through with creation of new material, I personally found that there is the Book of Revelation maybe could be compared to the Book of Job. And what I mean by that is this: in the Book of Job, we all know the story. There's a fight. There is an argument happens in heaven, right? Satan says, "Listen, God, there is nobody on the earth that loves you just for you. They love you because of the good things that you give her. It's a great benefit to be a religious man or a woman, and as long as you do something for them, they will praise you." And God says, "That's not true. That is not true. Satan, you must know there are really some sincere believers that love me just for me and not for the benefit I give them. Look at my servant Job." And of course, then Satan says, "Are you kidding me, God? Give me the power to take from Job everything, and he will curse you to your face." Now, the interesting thing in Job is that Job himself does not know about this conversation. And this is very unfair. This is terrible. But Job does not know what's happening up there. He doesn't know why all of this horrible stuff is happening to him. And he doesn't even know why in the end it turns out well for him, right? He's just clueless. Who are the informed people? It's us who read the book of Job, right? But the book of Revelation is actually just the opposite of that. The book of Revelation explains through these visions why the suffering of the early Christ followers is happening in such a horrible way as it's happening. So this is the main difference, okay? They both tell us about the big heavenly visions and arguments and fights and battles, but actually the recipients of the book of Revelation, whether they lived in the first century when it was written, or now as we're eavesdropping on that conversation, we actually being told and explained a lot of things that are happening.
Yeah, yeah, Ellie, thanks for mentioning by the way, the book. So I know a lot of people probably don't know. We did put together a book a few years ago. So we started with, creating courses and things like that and just teaching about Revelation. And we realized there's so much material. We actually got scared for a while. And we were like, we can't do this. This is not manageable. As Tupa was saying, this is a life work. And we said, we're not quite sure we want to commit so much to just Revelation. There's so much other things that we want to talk about and write about and speak about. And so we kind of backed off for a while. We did a little bit. We put together some stuff. We backed off. So I think now we're getting back to it because I think the time is right. Let's put it that way. The time is right. But yeah, so
we're no longer afraid of not having the key.
Right. Yeah, perhaps that's what changed. That's what changed for us.
Oh yeah, no, that was the point. And I think it's one thing that's really interesting for me, and obviously for the audience right now, because I'm putting myself a bit in the audience as well. It's knowing the amount of time you two worked on Revelations and the course that already exists and all the other things we can learn. That's a thing that it's so interesting, and it's a fabulous opportunity to kind of pick your minds and understand more about how also to kind of know how the courses are also do in the Israel Bible Center. So I do invite everyone to join us and to be able to see more and to watch more about this. And I think the other thing people were really curious and really asking about, it's of course about the imagery and how we can interpret a lot of the passages and what can we look in the book of Revelations? How can we start unpacking? We already understand we have 6 main things to see and understand it's it's historical in a sense. Was written to a specific audience, but we can also learn a lot from it. So what's the imagery that you think it's the most powerful, and that what when we think about Revelation, what does it bring to your mind?
To me, it's the book of contrasts in many ways. It's the contrasts are striking. They're powerful. Sometimes they weigh heavily upon us. Okay, so the visions that you see, they just awaken us in such a way because there's such a dichotomy between the struggle of the powerless and the powerful, the oppression that people go through, and the suffering. But yet there's vindication. So like right now, things are terrible, things are bad. And this is typical of apocalyptic genre and I think literature that comes out of that. Is right now, things are really bad. You're going through something really, really terrible. You have trauma in your life and you're looking to God for hope and you're saying, where can I find some sort of respite, something? But what you don't know, that in the heavens, there's a battle going on and you're actually a part of the story, and you don't realize this because you're a part of this drama that's playing out. You're suffering here on earth, just like Ellie was saying in Job, right? You're suffering here on earth, but this is a result of something that's happening in the heavenly realm, and this is a picture of that type of revelation type literature. We call it apocalyptic literature, right? And that other Jewish works actually talk quite a lot about similar types of ideas where the person who is let into heaven and sees the visions, those visions are meant to explain why these things are happening on earth. Why things haven't come true that have been promised, or what's stopping this from happening. And so a lot of the
Look,
why, sort of say, gets
look,
answered
look,
through these visions.
look, Pinchas, I think we need to even just mention that the whole word apocalyptic, right? It just means something that's been unveiled.
Unveiled,
In
yeah.
other words, right, something that's secret that doesn't make sense becomes making sense, right?
Yeah, yeah, that's what
So,
it means.
so if we're interpreting it such a way that it's still not making sense, that means that we're not reading this anywhere in the neighborhood of how it was intended.
Yeah. So imagery is very powerful. I think one of the most difficult things in Revelation. So as we read, as I said, to me, the contrasts, they speak to me, in a very loud way, but the imagery, and this is where I get stuck a lot of times, is because I do want to understand what means something else, and sometimes I'm being too scientific about it, perhaps, and I just kind of need to let it go. But I think a lot of people are like me. They get stuck on the imagery. They just want to know, what does this mean? What does that mean? And so at some points I have to raise my hands and I say, I have no idea what this means. I've exhausted all my reference points. I look through literature and I find no references in an antique world to what that I can tell you with certainty this means that. But at other points where I'm like, okay, this is an easy one. I totally understand this one because this piece of history I know for a fact, and I know where this imagery comes from. And that's what I mentioned, actually, my earlier points, is that the apocalyptic literature speaks in images. It speaks in pictures, not just words, but they're meant to be pictures that come up in our mind. And those pictures have meaning. Us as human beings, we always interpret the world through images. When we see an image of something, it bears very clearly in our mind, what does that mean? Because we go to our personal experience with that image.
Picture is
Yes.
worth 1,000 words.
At least 1,000, if not
Right.
more.
Right. And yeah, I think also for me, the imagery is very interesting and but I think one of the images that really brings my mind and that I always think about, it's about the woman clothed in purple. So
Yes.
I was wondering if we can talk a bit more about it. And let me bring, wait, the slide. Yeah. Let me bring the passage here. So.
All right, awesome. Do you want me to read these off for us, Chupa?
That I can. And the woman was clothed in purple and scarlet, and adorned with gold and precious stones and pearls, holding a golden cup in her hand, which is a very powerful and regal imagery. But I think we can have way more from that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, if you say purple, clothes in purple and scarlet, I immediately basically say, like, okay, she was, wearing Prada, and Chanel. Like, if I was writing in the modern world, this is what I would say. This is a woman who was really decked out in some of the best finery that it is. Precious stones, pearls, and then she's holding a golden cup, Yeah, very regal imagery. But then what Revelation does, it flips that completely by telling us that she's not that regal at all. So to me, this is one of those contrasts, right? It's where I tell you something that's meant to be understood this way, and I tell you this is not how things seem, right? They're completely opposite. So no, this woman is not noble, wearing purple, scarlet. That's the garment of the kings, and it was made of very precious dyes. And then no, actually that woman is a prostitute, and not just a prostitute, she's a murderous prostitute out of all things. And so obviously we understand that prostitution was a trade that people practiced, and that's how some people actually became quite wealthy in the ancient world. And that's Revelation 17. It starts this way, but then as it keeps going, we read the next verses. It says, and on her forehead was written a mysterious name, Babylon the Great, mother of prostitutes and abominations of the earth. That's not something I want to be called, Babylon the Great. In a Jewish mind, Babylon immediately, That's paganism, right? That's idolatry. That's galut. That's exile. Those are the people who came and conquered us, and the only reason why we were conquered by them because we weren't paying attention to our own God. So she's Babylon. She's the mother of prostitutes and abominations of the earth. Like that's pretty bad. And then it says that she's drunk with the blood of the holy ones. Okay, the Kiddushim, the people who follow God, and with the blood of Jesus. Now she's not just a prostitute. She's just some sort of abomination that drinks the blood of murdered people. Now that flips it completely upside down. And a lot of times we think like, oh, what does that mean? What does that mean? And I came across a coin a while ago that struck me. That this is a very rare coin, and I got it on the screen right here. Okay, the Sesterus coin from the era of Vespasian. This coin was minted in the 70s, and Vespasian, of course, is very, very important to the Book of Revelation, by the way. And there's many coins of Vespasian, but this particular one, we don't have a lot of them. There are very few of them. He's made multiple coins depicting, sort of say, scenery of Rome. And this one, the woman, finely dressed, is sitting on these bumps, these hills. And you could see in the image her name. You could see right next to her, it says Roma. And right next to her is a picture of a she-wolf, by the way. There's an eagle out there on that coin as well. This is all Roman imagery of the state. And that what John is going to do with this imagery, he's going to play with it all the way. Because somebody who had a coin like this in their hand would know this imagery right away. But unless you have seen a coin like this, it would be very hard for you to understand. Like, this is a tangible relic of the past that we hold in our hand, and we're like, oh, that makes sense. But if I've never seen a coin like this, I would really be wondering, what in the world are you talking about?
And also, Pinchas, just for our audience, the city of Rome is known in the ancient literature as a city that sits on the 7 hills. Okay, and so the identification of this woman in Revelation 17 is almost unavoidable. With the Roman state, that's unavoidable. The city of Rome / state / authorities. Although I have to say that Revelation does some absolutely amazing things that I mentioned earlier about how Revelation defies interpretation. Is it okay that I'll give one interpretation?
We always have multiple interpretations of the same passage, so you might as well go with our tradition. If anybody who read our book, they would know that we take a passage, when we explain it, then we say, but it can also mean this and this and this and that, and we give other alternatives, because that's how we are.
Well, so I was working in Revelation 11 or 12. Somebody looked this up about the 2 witnesses, right? The 2 witnesses. And there is a really strange text there that says this 2 witnesses, eventually the beast rises from the sea, and this beast kills them, which there is a lot of this in the book of Revelation, that eventually God's people will prevail, they will become victorious, they will reign and rule, they will receive the kingdom, but there will be a period, some kind of long enough and yet short enough period of time where they're just brutally murdered, including their leaders. Okay, so there's 2 witnesses of Revelation, and people break their heads figuring out who these people are, or they're real people. But that's not the point. The point is that the beast rises up, the beast kills them. Now, they eventually will rise from the dead, right? And according to but what it says there, it's really interesting. It says, it's obviously talking about the Babylon and Rome. Okay, it's for sure talking about this. It's like you're reading this and you realize that this is Roman state persecuting the early Jesus followers. Many of them were Jewish, many of them were not Jewish that joined this Jewish movement. but it's the Romans. And then it does this weird thing would actually make my point about the Revelation doesn't really care about our keys or categories or anything. And it says this, that their bodies laid, I think, for 3 days, it says, in the city where their Lord was also crucified. And you go like, what? What did I miss? What did I just miss? What just hit me over the head? Because, wait a minute, are we talking about Rome or are we talking about Jerusalem? Now, technically speaking, Jesus wasn't crucified exactly in Jerusalem. He was crucified outside of Jerusalem, right? But on the other hand, if we have to pick Mumbai, Moscow, Jerusalem, and I don't know, Buenos Aires, we'll say, okay, it happened in Jerusalem, right? And Jesus did say, listen, Jerusalem kills the prophets. And there was no prophet that died outside of Jerusalem. So he was kind of like predicting his own death in Jerusalem. So what this does when you start reading this, and just when you think that you realize, okay, this code stands for this, then the author, in its brilliant way, confuses you in a spiritual way, folks. Challenges your pride, your interpretive pride, to actually humble yourself, to say, listen, I understand the message. The message is that we will suffer unjustly, we will be brutally beaten, but we will kick butt in the end. We will win. We are on the winning side. How it all fits, sometimes it's very hard. Is it Rome? Is it Jerusalem? Is it a hybrid image of both? Is it Jerusalem that, as long as it rises against God? Is it Rome that, as long as it rises against God? Is it about, I don't know, modern day Russia that rises against God? Is it about modern day or USSR, or is it about modern day United States that could be interpreted as rising against God? I mean, please forgive me if I'm stepping on your toes right now. It doesn't really matter. This could be applicable to almost anything that rises itself against God. That's why we have to be very careful with the keys, and we have to approach God's scripture in general, but especially the book of Revelation, with unparalleled humility. If we ever hope to understand what we're meant to understand.
And
I mean, Revelation is like that. Yeah, go ahead, Tupa.
Yeah, no, I was just going to mention that this coin is fascinating for me. I'm a historian, and coins are one of the things that we can grasp from the past and that bring a lot of information. So forgive me if I'm a bit too excited about coins, but anyway, my point is it's fascinating because if we think about ancient times and we think about Vespasian and we think about how Rome will persecute the Jews after the first revolt in the 70s, and then there will be a second revolt, and this persecution was not common in the ancient world for Rome. Rome wouldn't do that often. But then we have a lot of other contexts with Vespasian needing to put himself in a more powerful position because he was the son of a former slave woman, and so he needed to assert himself and assert his power. So all of this comes into play, and I think it's interesting to notice and to see this image, because one of the interpretation, and we had quite a lot of questions about if what was the woman mentioned to the Roman Catholic Church, and for the period it was written, the Roman Catholic Church didn't exist, so it was impossible for the writer to, of course it was also talking about the future, but it's impossible in that moment. It was a way more clear reference to Vespasian and to other imagery in the time than necessarily the Catholic Church. And of course, there is plenty of possibilities of understanding this. So I just wanted to point that.
To Pam, at the
Me.
time of the time of a Great Reformation, when the reformers and people in general began to read the Bible in the vernacular, right, in the common people's language, and at the time that Europe was covered with blood of the Protestants, covered with blood of the Protestants, and the Roman Catholic governmental persecution was just brutal beyond imagination. It's natural for the Protestant believers, right, to think, to link it to the Roman Catholic Church. It makes perfect sense in their time, right?
But that's we've come back to your point that you can link this imagery to a lot of different events and a lot of different moments in history, and that's why I was fascinated by the coin and the imagery in the coin, because it brings this very palpable way of looking at it and thinking like, wait, so in the ancient times, people actually also saw Rome as a city, like there was a woman dressed in these very finery things and sitting on top of the hills because that's what represents the city and so on. So I think it's fabulous to be able to see those different possibilities with the text, and that we don't need to be close to just, well, this is necessarily only this point, and that because the text was meant to bring a lot of things to many different people. So that's also why probably wasn't just saying Rome specifically.
Right. I mean, look, Tuva, right there in the text, we're looking Babylon the Great.
Yes.
You know, what does Babylon have to do with Rome? I mean, if we're talking about Roman context, Babylon was a long time ago. Okay, hundreds and hundreds of years ago. Like, Babylon is gone. You know, why are we talking about them? Why are we calling her Babylon? The text itself tells you that throughout history, there's this evil state, there's this evil system that just keeps resurging itself. And it's the same thing over and over. Change the name of the country, as long as the people are following the same godless path, this is who they're going to be. You know, is it going to be Babylon? Yeah, at that time it was Babylon. Then it was Rome. So look, what did Babylonians do? What is the greatest thing that Babylonians have done? You know, sort of say, what's the greatest? What's the worst thing that they've done to Jewish people? Well, they destroyed the temple. Look, that's the greatest tragedy, is the destruction of the temple. What did Romans do? The worst thing possible, the Romans destroyed the temple. So do you not see the parallelism of this? The temple has always been the center. And so now, why is Rome connected to Babylon? Because both of them did the same exact crushing blow to Jewish people. And it's symbolic and it's powerful, because when you destroy the temple of other people's God, what you're really saying is that we're mightier than your God. Your God is nothing. Our gods are this, and your God is nothing. So we're just going to wipe you out. And it's a very powerful imagery that strikes at the very psyche of people. And so that's why, you know, this imagery just continues to captivate me. And so I'm glad that you appreciate the coin, by the way, because there's actually a bit more about this coin. It's fascinating. I'm really glad that I stumbled on the image of it, that I could show it to people, because this is a rare coin. There's a lot of Vespasian era coins that you can find that are very, very common, like the Judea Capta one, for example. Everybody knows about that one. It depicts a woman sitting under a palm tree or fig tree, I don't remember, and it just says Judea Capta. You know, here's Judea defeated. So Vespasian minted quite a few coins that have to do with his conquest, sort of say, of Judea and his victories there. But we have to remember, he's the one who did this, because Vespasian started the war. Okay, the conquest of Jerusalem, the destruction of the temple started with him. Now, he didn't finish it. His son Titus finished it, right? He backs out because he's been recalled to Rome because of the whole tumultuous situation with multiple emperors coming and going. And then finally, you know, he steps into Rome. He's called away from the front. But it's the forces that he put together that lay siege to Jerusalem. It's just that his son Titus finishes the job. And so what we read about in Josephus and destruction of Jerusalem and just, you know, sort of say the assault of the temple that happens, he's the one who did this. So yeah, you could see how Vespasian is going to actually play quite a bit
Of
as the
course.
bad guy. He's the proto bad guy in the book of Revelation without us actually naming names. Let's put it that way. Because that's what John's going to do. He's not going to name names, but he's going to drop enough hints. So let me see. I think there's another slide over there that I wanted to share more about this particular image. It
Okay.
kind of clarifies it.
Oh yeah.
That there's a little bit more from Revelation 17, and this just helps on it a little bit more. John writes, actually in his own words, says this requires a mind that has wisdom. Basically, pay attention, you wise people. If you know what I'm about to say, this is the clue. It says the 7 heads are the 7 mountains that the woman sits on. He tells you. He actually unlocks the code right there. The 7 heads, the beast with 7 heads, well, they represent the 7 mountains that the woman sits on. They're also the 7 kings. All right, so now we're talking about people. Then skip a little bit. It says the beast that was and is not is himself an 8th king, and yet is one of the 7. Now, figure that one out if you're a mathematical-minded person. It says,
This is from the Pirates of the Caribbean, the 7 pieces of 8.
7 pieces of 8, yes. It's kind of like that, yes. This is where you have to realize that numbers are not exactly numbers. They're not supposed to be, it's not arithmetic we're talking about. We're talking about imagery. And so look at that. So verse 15 says, then the angel sent to me the waters that you saw, where the prostitute is seated. Now remember, she's a woman who's dressed in purple, but she's really is a prostitute, right? The waters that you saw where she's seated are peoples, multitudes, nations, languages. So Rome is the city of 7 hills, and we know that from the mythology of Rome itself. And yet there's many waters. Why? Because of the Tiber River that's there, where right there, it's going through the middle of the city. And it says, and as for the woman you saw, she is the great city that has sovereignty over the kings of the earth. Now, do you need any more unpacking of that imagery that that he lets out? I mean, he actually encodes it and then later amazingly decodes it. Now, when this happens in Revelation, I get excited because I am given the interpretation. This does not always happen. Okay, this is a rare situation. When I'm looking at this, he is giving me the key. He's giving me the schema, the method, and then he says this means this means that.
It's amazing how I have this coin. It's almost as he's describing the coin, like, oh yeah, remember that coin again? It just doesn't mention it, right. But he's like,
he doesn't mention it. She's holding a scepter in her hand. I mean, it's hard to see on this coin because there's a little bit of damage. Again, this is a very ancient coin. She's holding like a scepter or a stick in her hand, and right besides the hills, you could see like a little animal. Okay, this is the she wolf. Okay, and right under the she wolf are the Remus and Romulus. This is the progenitors of the entire Roman society. They're right there in that coin next to those 7 hills. And then there's the eagle. There's now we get into more of a Roman mythology of its own founding and myths and stuff. So there's everything in that coin speaks something. But in a very similar way, John uses the same type of imagery and he remixes it. Like he takes what people know and he starts adding more imagery on top of it that comes from his world, perhaps.
Let me add something here. Look, I've argued in the beginning of the webinar is that each text of the Bible, in particular the book of Revelation, has its own peculiar audience. It's very, very specific to its social location, so to speak. And yet, in its peculiarity, there is hidden the universality. Now, as we hear this unpacked, which is very, very beautiful, very precise, very time specific. Let me give you an example how today's Jesus followers in Russia and in Ukraine, majority of which are absolutely, of course, opposing the war that's happening as we speak. Many of them are reading the beasts of Revelation. There's 2 beasts of Revelation, right? One is rising, and then there is a second beast. And the second beast has the authority of the first. The second beast is sort of like a religious figure, first beast is a governmental figure, right? That's destroying, devouring, killing. And the second beast is the support. He's a lesser beast, but he's supporting. Now, if you look at today's situation, what you do see, I mean, it's like the beast number one is easy to identify, right? I mean, we've been watching the news for a long time. Okay, but the second one is really interesting. The second one, and many Christians today interpret the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Cyril, as very much fitting near perfectly the, the description of the second beast of the book of Revelation. Now, here's what I'm not arguing. I'm not arguing that that the book of Revelation in the first century meant Vladimir Putin and the patriarch that in Russia that supports his evil war. Okay, I don't think that's what it was meant there. But the kind of description that was there in the first century fits any of those future fulfillments, so to speak. The normal governmental persecution and evil that governments throughout history, whether it's Nazis, USSR, today's Russia, some future, doesn't really matter what, but there's almost always the beast that is the government that rose against God, and there is this religious guy, or be a church, or could be, it doesn't really matter, it could be something Muslim, for example, but the point is it could be religious that will be supporting and holding up the hands and verifying the authority of the government. And this is why this book is so powerful, that on one hand, it is so specifically tied to a particular historical situation, and on the other hand, because it's so tied, it is so powerfully applicable to so many situations throughout the rest of the redemptive history, that it applies to us all, whether we live today, a million years from now, or 200 years or 100 years ago. It doesn't really matter. It's for us too, in a very powerful way.
And that's also why, as we said many times, it's a work for your life. And I think it's a book that you can read in different moments of your life and see and understand different things. And that happens, of course, it happens to other books in the Bible, and most of them are actually made, and that was part of the idea that you can read and reread and study again and understand and see things about yourself as well. Of course, it wasn't written to one particular person, but the message can also carry to more people. And I think that's also why it's so interesting to be able to study those texts and to have more references from the past, because seeing how it was understood in the past helps us to understand ourselves today as well. And I'm not saying there is a line between the past and us, because I don't believe that, but it's good to us. If we know more, then we can know more about ourselves as well. And on that note, I would like to bring for us just a little quick video with some of the students from the Israel Bible Center talking a little bit about their experience with us and how it's to study with us. It's a very quick video, and we are always wanting to have more people talking to us about their experience. As we talked in the beginning, we have people from all around the world, and I feel so happy to have everyone joining us from every different continent. So it's also we don't have that many people in the video, but we are always bringing more people to the videos, and we want to have as much people to talk about their experience as well. So let me share my screen. Just a moment. Is it there? Yeah. So, and we are going to disappear for a moment, and we'll be back.
Hello, I'm Richard Sperry. I live in Salt Lake City, Utah, in the United States.
Hello, everyone. My name is Janice.
Good evening. My name is Diana Rondo. I'm from El Salvador in Central America.
Hi, my name is Ruth Brooks, and I live in Toronto, Canada.
Hi, my name is Jana Jones McDowell, and this is my buddy, my foal. He's 7 months old. His name is Boaz.
Good day, all prospective students. My name is Martha Sutherland. I'm from South Africa.
Hello, I'm Father John Wright. I'm a Catholic priest.
Good morning, Graham Stewart here. I'm a minister in Australia, a place called Foster, New South Wales State.
Hello, my name is Eliza Williams.
And I'm Reg Williams.
Israel Bible Center, the courses have just really changed my perspective of Scripture, in that it's given me tremendous insight into Jewish cultural background and the mindset of the characters of the Hebrew Bible.
It helped me to discipline myself to study the Bible again every day.
When I discovered the Jewish roots of the Christian faith, my understanding of what it means to be a Christian took on a whole new definition.
The surprise was the wonderful learning I received for all the prophets, the writings, the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, and learning more about my Messiah and the land of Israel. And those were gifts, surprises that I found in the Israel Bible Center.
They challenge our thinking theologically and help me to really rethink some of the things that I've always understood.
I can't tell you how excited I am on a regular basis to open my computer and go to the Israel Bible Center and begin the lecture material.
And I found nothing but good stuff to say about them. I love how they focus in on an exegesis. They don't bring in biased, they don't bring in their own viewpoints. They are faithful to the original Hebrew scriptures.
At the Israel Bible Center, students learn a new and exciting way of reading and understanding the Bible as God's truthful words to all humanity within its cultural historic context.
The lecturers are amazing. They're academic and very well educated. They know the original languages. They know how to make connections between the Hebrew Bible and the New Testament. The teachers are reliable and are teaching from a variety of viewpoints.
I am certain that you will find yourself uplifted and your understanding of Scripture deepened. So please, Israeli Bible Center, go for it.
So I know that if you invest in this and you join up, that you will be as pleasantly surprised as I was. So enjoy your journey. Shalom.
I really do recommend Israel Bible Center, and I've really enjoyed the overall experience and would recommend it to anybody who wants a deeper understanding of the Jewish cultural and background of Christianity.
The instructors are phenomenal. The content is incredible.
If anybody is considering Bible college studies or furthering their Bible understanding, we recommend these courses to you.
If you're thinking of joining into some of their classes, their lectures, do it. It's worth it.
I encourage you, do not let this opportunity pass you by. What you will learn at the Israel Bible Center will truly change your life.
I always love watching these videos from our students. It's so cool. Some of these people I remember from many years ago when they started studying with us. And because I get to answer their questions, a lot of times I see the same names pop across my screen. So a lot of people don't know this, but at Israel Bible Center, when we teach courses, when we record all these videos and do all these lectures, a lot of times we keep revisiting the same course over and over, answering students' questions and stuff like that. And so I love, interacting with students. Sometimes they just send me all kinds of notes or thoughts, or sometimes they even drop me ideas that I haven't thought about, as I put together the materials. So it's actually kind of rewarding for me because I keep learning as I, keep teaching. I'm also growing in the process. So, and I think many of us who are in this same vocation would probably say the same.
Yeah, I would totally say that learning it, because the learning process is never only one way. We always learn from the students as well, and that's part of, and we learn with each other, which is also great. And anyway, it's just a lot of fun. So if you can join us, it's nice. But I think so, as you may guess, the main question we have, it's about the number. It's about the number of the beast. I think that's the question I see popping here more. And there is, of course, a lot of other things people are asking, but many people are just really interested to know if you can explain more about the number and why do we have this number? What's the number of the beast?
Pinchas, you want to go ahead? You go ahead, and then
I'll get us started. How about I get us started? But I want you to jump in on it because I know you have some good things to say.
I love jumping in. I never like starting. So
I know you want me to frame it, and then you'll fill it in. That's fine. That's what we do a lot of times.
But wait, it's not exactly this. It's also this.
That's how we work. If you know us, this is how we work. That's fine. So the number of the beast. Everyone is always asking the question, and it's a relevant question because people want to know. So read the book of Revelation. It tells you that the number of a beast is the number of a man. Okay? It tells you right there. So the big mystery is, who is it? My answer is very simple. Because I'm a bit more of a historically minded person, I'm like Tupa. I'm into history. I'm into studying these obscure, weird facts that nobody thinks are important. I happen to think it's Nero. Okay, now why Nero? Because I've just been talking about Vespasian quite a bit. I think it's Nero and Vespasian. Vespasian is the one who dealt the biggest blow to Jewish people. But really, it all began with Nero. Nero is what set this, what started, and basically he's the one who started the war, let's put it that way, that Vespasian ended. Nero is the imagery of all bad imperial things that can possibly be, and Vespasian is just yet another reiteration of that, essentially, if you think about it that way. So I do think the book of Revelation was written much later. It's in the 90s, and so it's reflecting on all these different images, sort of say, that have come up. But my understanding, my take on it is that this is an encoding. This is John's special way of speaking about a person without naming names. And so he has to be careful. Remember, he's in exile. He's a political, sort of say, liability. And so he says it's a number of a man, and his number is 666. So gematria is something that I think sometimes get mentioned as people study these passages, and if they start digging through commentaries in Revelation, they'll hear about this idea of gematria, where Hebrew letters are numbers. Okay, and so if you take the name Neron Caesar and you spell it out in Hebrew, and you take each letter, and it will correspond to a number, and that sum of those numbers will be 666. So it is a very specific sort of say technique of encoding, sort of say, names, but you don't always know what it is, and you have to have some clue, some reference, and because it could be anything, and many things can add up to mean something else. So, and I have very, very certain reasons why I think it's speaking about Nero. Ellie and I actually went on in our book for quite a while talking about that, but I also have very, very, certain reasons why I think Vespasian is tied into it, and it doesn't have to be Nero or Vespasian, because some people think, because it's speaking about Nero as the beast, therefore the book of Revelation must have been written around the time of Nero. And the answer is no, because just like it is not about Babylon or Rome, it is about Rome, which is Babylon, and Babylon is Rome. The same thing with Nero, Vespasian. They really are.
Nero was believed by many to have been resurrected. By the way, that he was going to come back, that he
People
was gonna
feared that he would rise from the dead.
Right,
He would come to haunt them. I mean, this is pretty scary stuff. Yeah, there's a lot of ancient myths and fears about Nero, and Romans themselves didn't really like him very much either, but Jews even more so. So he is the ultimate bad guy. Okay, he's like, if everybody wants to, who's the ultimate bad guy that you think of today, and then now think of the other ultimate bad guys on the scene of history, and we can start naming names, and each one of those names has become vernacular. So that's the beast. That's the idea of the beast. So when he says the name is a man.
Pinchas, you wanna explain how the minority manuscript that says actually that the number of the beast is 616 supports the thesis that this is primarily referring to Nero?
Right. So so a lot of times, like I said, numerology is one of those tricky things. You could say, all right, well, this number corresponds to this letter. I can maybe spell out somebody else's name using those same numbers. If I really want to start picking names of different historical people, maybe I can spell out somebody else's name and it will come out to be 666. So does that mean they're the beast? And so numbers and letters can be tricky. But here's where the problem, resolves itself for us. Because somebody could say, well, Nero, you're just trying to make it fit. Well, the truth is, this is how I know it really fits. Some manuscripts of the book of Revelation, the scribes changed the number. In some places it says 666, and in some places it says 616. And you say, what in the world? Like, how is that possible? Doesn't that change the name? Well, yeah, that would throw the whole code, right? I mean, because if this is a mathematical thing, that will throw it out. Well, here's the problem. If you spell Nero's name, not in Hebrew, but if you actually take and spell his name in Latin, then you drop the N in Hebrew, Neron.
Well, wait. You still spell in Hebrew, right? Because you're counting this in Hebrew.
Well, you're going to count it.
But the pronunciation is the
Latin pronunciation by dropping dropping the final noon off of his name. Okay, so he's still Nero Caesar. Okay, Nero Caesar, right? So you still have that, but you drop the final noon, which is a Jewish style of spelling it, and now you go to the Latin style of spelling it by dropping the N, and guess what? It comes out to be 616. So now we have some manuscripts that say 666, some manuscripts say 616, and either way you count, you get to either the Latin version of Nero's name or the Hebraized version of Nero's name. And so how are you going to make that with another name?
Which by the way, and I don't remember the Greek word for the beast. You know what the Greek word for the beast is? I don't know.
I don't remember it.
Theron or something like this. Anyways, if you take the Greek word for the beast and you count it also using gematria.
Yeah.
I think in Greek, because it's not just the Hebrew thing. Greek also has a gematria, right? So
yeah, you can use gematria in Greek.
The word beast also comes up to 666.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't checked that. I haven't counted. So because again, gematria is not really my area per se, but I am fascinated with it as a literary device, and I do meet it from time to time even rabbinic literature. I see this all the time. So again, it's a technical device when I want to encode things, and yeah, the short answer is that I do think that the beast, the man to whom that number corresponds, is Nero. I know that may mess up people's interpretations of whatever that means down the line, okay? But historically speaking, from that vantage point, that's what I'm seeing. Now, the first century Christ followers, that's how he is the ultimate bad guy, and that's how they would have seen that. Now, how we interpret that later on in other generations and apply that's a different story. But
interestingly enough, I mean, we all are, because of our, social location and history, are preoccupied in many ways with the Antichrist, right? But there are places in the Bible that actually says that there's many Antichrists, right? Yeah. I mean, it's just
there's no Antichrist in the Revelation, by the way.
Well, you could. I mean, it's Daniel, right? You could interpret it as the figure, okay, especially when you're connecting it with Daniel. But the point is that
There are many antichrists. Yeah, I get it.
Connecting it just to one Nero and then Vespasian or whatever, with some particularity, does not limit you from realizing that these son of guns will come a lot of times throughout the redemptive history, and we should not be surprised when they do, because they will be defeated in the end. See, so in the end, the message of the book of Revelation, that's why it's so powerful, because it's powerful for them and it's powerful for us today. It's going to be powerful for if this ever reoccurs in the future. Yeah, I was wondering if we could talk about, just because this is a short webinar and this is a huge topic, we entitled the webinar as a Hebrew insights into Revelation.
Yes.
So I want to bring up a couple of other kinds of Hebrew insights, that Pinchas and I've come up with in our book and then in our course. And this is the kind of, it's very much characteristic of the rest of the thousands, literally, of insights, whether it's by us or our fellow professors that are just even more brilliant than us, right? It's very characteristic. So here's our few examples. One of them has to do with the mark of the beast going on the head and on the hand. Now, what's interesting is that it goes on the right hand. Now, in modern scholarship, and I think modern scholarship is wonderful in many, many ways. One of them is one good example is Richard Bauckham, who made a very, very good case, that what the beast and the second beast and everything that's happening, that is like an antitype of everything that is supposed to be happening, or it's an antitype of Christ and the antitype of the apostles. The battle blow to the beast, and then the beast rising up again. Doesn't remind you of any stories, right? And the other beast is saying, look, he rose again. Look, we have to trust him because he's been risen again. So there's this anti-community of God alternative, if you would, satanic community of God that's being presented. It's going to be like that throughout centuries upon centuries of redemptive history. But what's interesting is that most people don't realize that when this mark of the beast is going to be placed on the heads and on the hands, they don't realize that the basic background for this is actually what I call the Jewish prayer gear. Have you ever seen this, strange Jewish man, dressed in black? We always see their pictures. Pinchas, show tefillin. You see that? If you can, just go ahead, open it up and place it on the forehead. You've seen it before.
I'm not going to place it on my forehead, but people have seen tefillin before.
Okay. So one goes on the forehead, symbolizing, and of course there's words of God inside of that little box, right? Words of God are supposed to be symbolizing God's control over your mind, over your thinking process. And then on the left hand, pay attention, left hand, another box, also with the words from the Torah, being included, tied to the left hand. Why left hand? Because it's closer to the heart. It symbolizes control of God's word of all your actions, not just thoughts, but also your actions. Now, the mark of the beast is going to be going where? On the forehead and on the right hand. You see the opposition kind of thing, but tying together, and yet slightly different to show the alternative kind of thing, the parody of the holy things. That's one small example. Another great example is this mysterious Nicolaitans that interpreters have a lot of fun with this. But the one that is also a possible interpretation, to me, it's likely, I'm not sure, I think Pinchas also agrees that this is a pretty interesting way to look at this, was brought up by a Christian Hebraist. Pinchas, what's the guy's name? Lightfoot, right? Lightfoot. I think
John Lightfoot, yes.
John Lightfood. I think he was a member of Westminster Assembly, if I'm not mistaken, unless it's a different one.
I don't remember.
Anyways, there was a whole slew of phenomenal Hebraist Christian scholars throughout especially after the Reformation, but before that as well, actually. So he pointed out this very interesting thing, that Nicolaitans, the group that otherwise doesn't come up anyplace else, right, in the Bible, is probably, it's not in Greek. It's actually, he thinks it's in Aramaic. Now, at the time when he did his research, it was fashionable to think that Hebrew was not spoken, that Hebrew was a dead language, that the Jews spoke Aramaic. So I think he only really allowed himself to interpret this in terms of Greek versus Aramaic. So here's what he said. And this actually may be an Aramaic phrase that's simply spelled in Greek. Just the same thing, like, for example, Bethlehem, it's Beit Lechem, it's the house of bread, or Capernaum, Kfar Nahum, village of Nahum, right? Spelled Capernaum. It sounds like Greek, but it's not really Greek, it's Hebrew. So Nicolaitans, there is a really, really good shot, really good chance that this is actually an Aramaic phrase, that a language that's very close to Hebrew. If you speak one, you can understand the other. It's like Russian and Ukrainian or Bulgarian or Czech. It's very similar languages. That basically says something like, we will eat. Now, you'll say, what is this about, we will eat? Well, remember that the book of Revelation basically is dealing with all the same topics that the letters of Paul is dealing with, because actually they were written at the same time, right? And remember how much of Paul has to do with sacrifices to idols, that nearly everything in the Roman world was, you couldn't, outside of a Jewish world, Jewish stores, you couldn't even purchase wine or meats that are not sacrificed to the idols. What do you do with this? And so it's very possible that these were groups of people who were saying, we will eat what's forbidden by Jerusalem Council in Acts chapter 16, I think, right, Peter? It's forbidden to eat the food sacrificed to idols, but we will violate this. It's very possible that Nicolaitans have to do with this group that we know from Apostle Paul was very much part of the first century religious landscape. So, Pinchas, maybe you can think of a few other insights like that can show in the book of Revelation how the kinds of things that you could think about would be informed by either Hebraic linguistic or Jewish cultural
context. I can't think of anything right now, just because I got stuck thinking about what you just mentioned. you led me down the trail, and then my mind is just going into that direction. You reminded me of John Lightfoot, and my mind. But there are a lot of examples like that, and I think we go through it in our book quite a bit. We're just kind of really, this is a very peculiar practice that where you take the Greek text and you turn it into Hebrew, and it starts saying something else. Actually, it starts speaking to you in a different way, and some people would say, well, that's a very unorthodox practice, but actually I think it is, because while John may be writing it in Greek, or maybe he has somebody writing it for him, maybe he's dictating it. Letters were often dictated to a scribe. He's probably still thinking in very Hebrew terms. And so because, he's a Jew, and so that's his language, he's thinking about all the scriptures. I'm pretty sure he didn't study the book of Daniel in Greek.
I'm pretty sure he knew it in original. And so as he's thinking about Ezekiel and Daniel and visions and all these different sort of say apocalyptic stories, he's not thinking in Greek. He has to turn it into Greek later, but his original thought is probably flowing in his mother language, the language he's much more comfortable with. But no, he's writing to people who may not all speak that language, so he's going to turn it around. And so this is kind of like a little reverse archaeology, where we're going with linguistic archaeology, going backwards into what he might have thought. And so when we do that, sometimes it turns out some interesting, peculiar things. So actually in our commentaries, we do that from time to time, and it lends some interesting fruit. So but you brought up some really great examples about Nicolaitans, that's the one that's always a mystery to everyone, because every commentary I pick up in Revelation is gonna come up with some kind of crazy, weird theory of who these Nicolaitans were, where in reality it's actually quite simple if you translate it into Hebrew from Greek.
But I also, because I actually did not encounter as of yet somebody's commentary that actually seeks to read the book of Revelation very much along the lines of Apostle Paul, because people kind of think Apostle Paul, that's one topic of conversation. I mean, we know an excellent scholar who just released a wonderful course with us, by the way, Mark Nanos. We all are sort of, in one way, whether we agree with him or disagree with him, we're more or less his disciples, because he's been there before us, he preceded us by
many of us.
10,
we all read
years.
his books.
10 years ago, when we were just beginning to think about Jewish Apostle Paul, he already wrote a couple of books about it.
Exactly.
He just released a course with Israel. Read it. Make sure to enroll, folks. Don't let this pass by. Really, if 30 years ago when I was starting out, there was Israel Bible Center, oh my gosh, I would have been light years ahead by now. What I know now, if I did. So anyway, sign up, okay? But so Mark Nanos, I always think that, but the problem with Mark Nanos is that he doesn't do anything but Apostle Paul. You know, it's like he reads Apostle Paul with Apostle Paul within the context of Apostle Paul. The same is the problem when we read the book of Revelation. If we only read the book of Revelation in that context, but we do not read it in the obvious context. I mean, we have other set of letters and the Acts, where a lot of what we know about Paul we can actually find out about. Why don't we also bring that information in our reading of Revelation, which was what Pinchas and I do actually very much, because doesn't it make sense? It comes from the same time. They're dealing with the same issues, right? Mm-hmm. Anyways, so I'll stop there. And you folks, when you enroll, you'll write us, you'll comment, we'll interact with you, and you tell us what you think.
Yeah, we have a lot of questions and a lot of people wanting to pick your minds about particular subjects.
Let's get some of them.
I'm trying to get some. I got a lot of them for you already. Sorry, I'm trying to see them as fast as I can.
It's overwhelming when you have that.
It is, but it's so. There is someone asking, is the book of Revelation written in an anthropomorphic language?
Anthropomorphic language. I think all of the Bible is written in anthropomorphic language. It's a good question.
I think, that's questions from Paul. I think it's like trying to bring, like, if the whole book tries to bring reference to cities as people went to evil as people went to, I think that's mostly of the question. And I think that's sorry for the cat.
That's study the book of Revelation.
Yes.
She studies way more than me. She doesn't write, which is a pity. But I think the idea is like how we can see how anthropomorphized English is not
Mhm.
best, but anyway, this whole idea that I think parts of the book do bring this imagery, which is very rich for us in this way of connecting cities to like in a person's image or other things in like images of people. What do you think?
All right. I mean, if we talked about the Rome, right? And
Yes.
so Rome is represented by a woman and wearing the scarlet clothes and things like that, holding a cup in her hand. So that other cities are also have their own characters. So as John writes the letters to the 7 assemblies right there, each one of the assemblies actually has a character. So as you read that little interaction that he has with each one of them, you kind of start to catch on that they actually do have a character, and that the assemblies of Christ followers in those cities actually represent a little bit of what the overall city is, and he actually deals with them with what we call that local culture, right? So people always associate other people with like where they're from. You know, I talk to people that say, "Where are you from?" I said, "That's not going to really define me. I'm from all over the place. I've been too many different places for you to pick me." But you meet somebody and they're like, "Oh, you're such a New Yorker," right? Like, why do we say that? Well, because New Yorkers have a very particular personality that fits with the kind of culture that city offers, and so on and so forth. And so people will do the same thing. And I think in the ancient world, that didn't really change. It was in very similar way.
And yeah, I totally agree. And well, Neil Gaspar also asked us to comment a bit more on the seal, trumpets, and bowls. And was it very Hebrew? How historical? How this related to everyday practice of people?
Ellie, you got something on seals and trumpets that you want to share?
Not yet. Other than I just want to say that, and I was about to mention this earlier, but I didn't. I think it's fair to say that all of the entire book of Revelation, the moment it starts with the visions, right? It's like Russian nestling dolls. I know Russian is not a cool word right now, but listen, you know, Russia and Putin are two different things. Please understand that. It has nothing to do together. And the sooner he's gone, the greater Russia will be. But let me just say this, that the Russian dolls, the nestling dolls, right? The ones that go one
Matryoshka
inside of another.
Matryoshkas, the dolls.
The Matryoshkas, exactly. You take out, and then the second one comes out. And then you take it out, and then the second one, and so on. And then it goes like until this really small one that you're trying to take it out and realize that's the end, right? So I think the imagery that's being used is something like that in the book of Revelation. If you will see how almost no vision ends by itself. It's like when the vision is coming to this conclusive thing, then all of a sudden you realize then there is another door that opens up, and then all of a sudden there's trumpets comes out. And then this trumpet, and then the last trumpet becomes the next vision. And this whole, and this is why I think one of the most important things that you can do is actually to read the book of Revelation in one sitting.
Yeah.
In one shot. Look, it only takes like 2 hours. And it's even better when someone else reads it for you. Now, you should read it yourself. You should let other people read it. Try to read it in different languages if you have command of a couple of languages, because you'll get different perspectives, you know. But it's what you will see is this overwhelming sense of this one doll coming out, and then another one, and then one vision becoming another vision, becoming another vision, becoming another vision. And the whole point is that you must be overwhelmed by this amazing amount of visions that don't seem to fit together exactly, which is why when people are trying to categorize them, they go nuts. That's why the book of Revelation defies interpretation. It's because it's not meant to be broken up and studied like the way we study it, okay? And so you need to come out from the reading and hearing of this text with so many different visions, but basically one and the same message. God's people will suffer. God's people may suffer horribly, but any suffering of God's people will be under God's supervision, just as was the case with Job. Satan could not do one single thing to Job that God did not permit him to do. And God's people will rule and reign because eventually all evil will be defeated, and you will rule and reign with the resurrected Christ. And so in the end, it's not about when this starts and when this starts and rapture and all of this stuff that we're making this whole thing all about. It's not about that. It's about Jesus winning, or Yeshua winning, or whatever, and it's about us and those before us and those who come after us. It makes sense that we will suffer. It makes sense because that's what the book of Revelation is explaining to us. It's part of our destiny, and yet we will be victorious.
I want to chime in on the visions just a little bit. There's an excellent course, by the way, by Ralph Corner on the visions of Revelation. And so he specializes particularly in visions. That's what he focuses on. And so we have a course just on the visions itself. And he explains it in a very genius way. Something that a lot of people miss when they study Revelation is that the timeline in Revelation, it does not follow a linear timeline. Like in the Western culture, it's just like point A, point B, and it just keeps going. What he says is this timeline is circular, like a spiral. It's like a shofar. If you've seen it, it just has these twists, and the time overlaps, actually. There's points where it touches the same. It's like a spring. If you scrunched it together, it will touch the same points. And so things seems to be circular and repeating, and it's also multidimensional, because we tend to think of it in a very flat, sort of say, linear presentation of the visions. But if you take the visions and you actually imagine them to be, well, he uses Legos. He actually says, look, okay, if you put these Legos together, it actually makes a 3D image. And John looks at this point, and then he looks at that point, and that's why he breaks up some of his visions and some of his like bowls and trumpets. Like he starts talking about one, then all of a sudden he turns and he starts talking about something else, and then he turns again and he starts seeing it from a different vector, and he starts returning back to what he originally talked about. And so we want the simple structure, we want the linear, sort of say, distilled way, and John just keeps seeing these different visions as if he's holding something in his hand outside of time and outside of space, kind of looking at it from the perspective of seeing the whole big picture all at once rather than being shown little bits and pieces. And so maybe that's why it defies Revelation, because it gives us a perspective that we simply cannot embrace because we're not in that position. So anyway, he has a very fascinating course on the visions. He tries to explain how the system works. And so for people who are a little bit more technically minded, they want to kind of take it apart and dissect it. He does an excellent job with that. But I was just thinking about some of the things that we've talked about as far as the Hebrew revelation and the Hebrew context. And we talk quite a bit about spirits sometimes in our courses, the 7 spirits, and that's a big one. And the Messiah, you reminded me, the imagery of the triumphant Messiah, right? The resurrected Messiah, and the same slain Messiah. So the lamb as it was slain, and then that lamb is the lion. That imagery in Revelation is so powerful. And what people don't realize, of course, it's a very Jewish imagery. It comes straight from Judaism. In Judaism, there's a tradition about 2 messiahs, Mashiach ben Yosef and Mashiach ben David. And the rabbis talk about it all the time, trying to reconcile the image of the Messiah who's supposed to suffer and die, and then the image of the Messiah who's supposed to come and reign. Like, how can both be the same? And so their solution is to say, okay, this is Messiah, son of Joseph, and this is Messiah, son of David. This is the Messiah who's going to do kinds of the things that Joseph in the Bible did, and this is the Messiah who's going to do the kinds of things that David did. And so they're trying to reconcile it. Well, guess what? Revelation takes that, puts it together, and says, by the way, here's the secret. This is Jesus. This is Yeshua. This is who we're talking about. This was him then. This is him now. And this is him yet to come. In that sense, that Revelation is a very, very Hebraic book, but it takes a little bit of, sort of say, stepping out sometimes, even from the tradition that people are familiar with. And yes, we might take you into some rabbinic text and kind of show you these ideas there. And Hebrew always helps too, to kind of conceptualize these ideas.
Well, one other thing that we do, actually, Tupan, without me elaborating the point, take more questions. Sorry.
Yeah, let's do more questions.
It's better. Yeah.
Okay, we can do, because we already have our time up, but we can find we can get
Let's do a little bit more, yeah. Just
okay, a little bit more. Well, first of all, people are saying that's a great way to spend Sunday evening. So thank you very much. We also agree. It's a very nice way to. So Linda asks about there is the issue about the Nicolaitans, and if it's can we express it as the problem of compromise between faith and secularism? And I think it speaks a bit from what we've been talking about, how the Book of Revelation brings a lot of those two-side things and how those how it works for life. So, do you mind commenting a bit?
Pinchas, you want, or should I?
I'll go, and then you'll follow up as usual. We kind of have this almost tradition now going on.
Yeah, we do. This is how
So,
we actually do it.
Linda's question-
But
yeah.
listen, when we write books, it's just the other way around.
Right, exactly. You
I do
start
the
now, okay,
I
good.
do the main thing, and then Pinchas spices it up and fixes me up, and this is so funny. But in the Word, it's just the other way around. So go.
So Linda's question, I think it's completely appropriate, and I think she's absolutely right on in the sense of this is the vision of the secularism versus faith. Now it takes faith to say, I'm going to go through these circumstances, and I'm going to have to go through this uncomfortable life. I'm going to forego meat, right? So like Paul says, if what I eat is going to offend my brother, I'm just gonna not gonna eat, meat at all. That's what Paul writes in his letters, right? And so this is the same type of a situation. If eating food sacrificed to idols is a problem, which it is a problem for Jews, it is a problem for anybody from who comes from that framework. It is an issue. Then he just says, I'm just not going to do it at all. So yes, for Nicolaitans, there's the opposite problem. They're like saying, you know what? We don't care. We're going to do whatever we want to do. We will eat whatever we want to eat. And all of you people who decided that this is wrong, we're just going to ignore you. And yes, it is the idea of faith and faithfulness, perhaps a better term is faithfulness versus not being faithful. Are you going to do what needs to be done and to show yourself that, hey, I'm serious about this, versus I'm just going to go along with what everybody else is doing? And call it the secular world if you want to. I just call it the way of the world. The way the world goes is not usually God's way, and that means no restraint. That means no control. That means I'm not going to put myself on, under certain rules that I don't feel like doing. I want to live this way, so I'm going to do it. Hashem, God gives us limits. He gives us fences. Don't do this. Don't do that. Religious people understand that very easily, but I think a lot of people who are not having a harder time with that, they see that as limits. They see it as problems. I see it as liberating because I'm being told exactly what to do and how to live my life to please God. I don't see that as limitations per se. I see that as something very positive. But that's just my unique perspective when it comes to the commandments and mitzvot and things like that. So yeah, my answer to Linda is absolutely. I think it is about that. That's how it could be understood and interpreted and applied to even our modern world, wherever we are.
Let's take another question. I won't be adding. I'll just maybe take
just one
maybe
more.
I'll answer. Yeah.
Just one more. So this question is from Upuya Mava. It's hello from Crossroad, Texas. Based on what we all said pertaining to the 7 churches that were local in John's time, most of it sounds like past. Which parts then would be still future, as you alluded early, close to this, like, how can we see this past and future? And this is actually very close to the also Vincent question, which asks us if it's, when we talk about the 7 churches, can we say it's also, it talks about the current church?
Okay. So it's an excellent question. And look, there's different ways to look at it, really. Of course, mine is completely right, but I'm kidding. No, I'll share with you what I think, okay? But again, this is one Jew talking, okay? There's another Jew talking who would be thinking differently. But I think it's a mistake. It's a mistake to think of these parts talking about the past and these parts talking about the future. I really think it's all about the past, and it's all about the present, and it's all about the future. This is how I came to this. But Pinchas probably going to disagree, and that's okay, obviously. But the more I'm studying the book of Revelation, the more I see how all of this, in one way, could be traced to the first century, and then in how all of this could be applied to like things going on in our time, and how almost all of this could be applied also in some slightly different way in perhaps a different type of interpretation or application rather to perhaps a far future time. Look, I think we may be limiting our this book by trying to domesticate it interpretively. And I guess what as I'm getting older, and I'm not that old, but as I'm getting older, I think my reading of this book is slowly becoming more mature. And I think at this point, I may say 10 years or 20 years, if God gives me the time to live those years, I may look back, I'll say I was wrong. But today, I will say that the book of Revelation is about the past, it's about the present, and it's about the future. This is what I'm saying.
I got a slightly different perspective from this, but basically there are historical parts, obviously, that are referring to specific people, specific cities, and so those pieces we can clearly interpret in a very, particular historical way. These are real people, real cities, as I said in the introduction. But there's something that people have to understand when it comes to spiritual literature, and Revelation is a spiritual literature. The way we interpret it is a little bit differently. So, for example, this past week we've been reading Ki Tavo, okay, from the synagogue. Every synagogue in the world is reading Ki Tavo. The same exact passage we're getting towards the end of the book of Deuteronomy, and it's a story of the tribe standing right there, about to cross over. They're getting their final instructions and things like that. And so, do you really think we read that in a historical way and just keep reminiscing about what happened thousands of years ago? No, we're actually taking those lessons and applying them to us today. How is it different that our life is today? We're not standing at the threshold of the promised land. We're in a different situation, but it doesn't mean that those words can't apply to us. So in Jewish tradition, there's this much more multidimensional way of reading the text. Maybe some of you have heard about one rabbinic method is called Pardes. Okay, Pshat is the basic, simple, fundamental historical reading of the text, but then there's Darash, for example. Darash is another level. It's like, now I'm going to get a little bit more inductively. I'm going to go further. What is that? What is it saying to me on a broader sense? Is there a moral lesson here? Is there another implication? And there's Sod and Remes. There's more mystical applications, like, if I took this to mean something else, if this is a symbol of something else, how did that apply? There's multiple levels always to understanding most texts that are spiritual literature is meant to be understood in that kind of light. And Revelation being a spiritual book, it demands us that we read it that way, essentially. So yes, my answer is yes and yes, or both and. Yes, I read the church's references, to actual small groups, little house assemblies that have very particular character, and there are very specific things that are given to them. Does that apply to someplace? Does the message to Philadelphia apply to the modern city of Philadelphia? And I say no, as a historian. But then as a spiritual person, I would say, why not? Right? Maybe there are something in there that God wishes to communicate even through those words to us. The question is, are we listening? Are we intuitive enough to be able to hear that? And that's a different story. So that's a question, an answer. I answer like a scholar, and then I answer as a person of faith, because these are two aspects of the personality that I embrace, essentially. So there you go. That's mine.
Maybe we can take a couple of more questions. But the next question should go to Pinchas, because I'm going to go open up a door for my wife real quick, okay? So do that, and then I'll be right back. It will take me like literally 40 seconds, okay?
Yeah, we have, because the topic is really, really big, so we have a lot of questions coming in still. And there's questions about the final battle and the third temple. And of course, we can go back to some gematry and some numbers, or 144
I think we're going to have
Okay.
to do another webinar if we want to get to the battles and the third temple.
Yeah, I think it's what I'm worried with the questions is because we are already 10 minutes past the time we set, and I'm totally happy to be here for more time. I'm just worried because some of the questions demand us to talk for more time.
Yeah.
And I think we should bring it more time to people. Also, people also want to know more about how it relates to Daniel and Daniel visions to the end of the time, and how we can relate both texts, which I think it's very, very interesting topic.
Yeah, there's a lot of intertextual connections actually. And so let me just answer that question generally.
Yes, please.
If people are wondering about the intertextuality, is what we call it. It's the connection of one text to another. I do believe that the book of Revelation is very heavily dependent on certain, let's say, key texts. There's certain texts that I think the writer has in mind. He's inspired by those words, let's put it that way. He's definitely an educated Jew who clearly understands what he's talking about, and he's not a novice in this type of topic. So yes, I think Book of Ezekiel is very much close on his mind a lot of times. There are passages that pop up from Isaiah that are very close on his mind quite often. Daniel, absolutely. Daniel could not be dismissed. And there's actually a slew of other non-canonical texts that I truly personally believe that the author was influenced by. No doubt in my mind that he's been a reader of Enoch, okay? No doubt in my mind that he's read those stories and is reflecting upon them as he's describing what he's seen, because some of the language just flat out overlaps, let's put it that way. And so book Ezra, Enoch, all these different books, Baruch, they come from antiquity. All these traditions have been there, and I think the author knew them very well. And so a lot of times, if I say anything to Christians, who are reading the Bible and, trying to make sense of it all, a lot of times people put themselves in confines of what they call canonical literature. And it's good, but it only takes people so far. There's many, many more texts outside of the canonical text that expand us even further. And I realize not everybody can dedicate all of their time to study those texts because there's so many, and some of them are not so easy to understand. But that's what Elia and I actually try to do in the courses. That's what we try to do in our book, as we try to unpack it and sort of give people the shortcut path to trying to connect some of the things together, because we're the ones who sat down and spent a lot of time putting this stuff together, and now, for the benefit of our students, we're able to just kind of give them a shorter path to connect some of those dots. So those are all really good questions, but there's generally, I'm always guiding people towards techniques and methods of how to better sort of study the text. And so that's one of my admonitions, is for people to look beyond. Yes, look to other scriptures, look to Ezekiel, look to Isaiah, look to Daniel, but then also look outside of the canonical literature as well.
Yeah, and perhaps I'm slightly more qualified than Pinchas right now to answer the question about Daniel, is because I'm currently actually working with this material exactly on Daniel, believe it or not. So let me just kind of add to what Pinchas has, the points that he's already made. So clearly we have not just biblical but extra biblical. Now, where I would specify something, that overwhelming majority of allusions and references in the book of Revelation are actually biblical. They're not extra biblical. For sure, they do exist extra biblical, but overwhelming majority canonical, extra canonical. But overwhelming majority are actually canonical. What's interesting is that when you start actually listing the incredible amount of references, there's almost literally every single book of the Bible quoted, referenced, alluded to in the most amazing way. It's almost like very fitting that the book of Revelation is in the end of the Bible, because it basically gets the whole thing in. Almost every prophet, almost every Torah story, Exodus is all over the book of Revelation. Mm-hmm. But I think, having said that, the question about the book of Daniel is a very fair one, because I I think the author of the book of Revelation, or at least what's happening in the Revelation, is more tied up to Daniel than any other book of the Bible in the kind of ways, even though it's tied up to almost every book of the Bible, but it tied up to the overall message of the book of Daniel. Remember, overall message of the book of Daniel is living in the occupation, is living in the exile, living within the pressures of the paganism, of the anti-law of God. The stories about, the three Jewish boys, other than Daniel, right? How they stand through this whole thing, and then how then it actually, I think was it chapter 7, it begins to spill into the visions and dreams, and then the language of Daniel and the language of Revelation, the time, half time, the times, time, times, and half a time, and the language of 1,260 days, and the 3.5 years, and the 42 months. Of course, we're talking about exactly the same period of time. It's just 4 different ways of saying the same darn thing. So I think the question is a very fair one, and I have to agree that even though the book of Revelation's got every imaginable book of the Bible in it, in a very powerful and prolific way, the book of Daniel in particular probably has got the closest of the connection because of those kinds of anti-idol worshiping, anti-paganism kind of themes of the Revelation, in a way that most people are actually not thinking that these are connected. That's how I would answer that.
No, I think you're absolutely right, Ellie, because the theme of Daniel is all about the struggle of living a faithful life, faithful to God. How is Daniel as a Jew supposed to live a faithful life in the land of the exile, away from the temple, as a minority in this crazy pagan system that he finds himself in. He can't get away. He is where he is. He's a captive. And so, in a way, I think the message of Revelation is the same. Yeah.
He's got a pagan name.
He's got a pagan name that changed everything. And it's like the same thing is happening here. Here's these people stuck in the pagan world, yet the calling on their life is to live a faithful life to God. And that means not living like the rest of the world lives. That means resisting all of these pressures. And so the pressures that they face in many ways are the same pressures that Daniel faced. I mean, that's why the stories in Daniel are so, they would relate to them in such a powerful way. So yeah, I absolutely agree with it. I mean, the book of Daniel was very much an inspiration, for people, even in the time of like the Maccabees and things like that. Why? Because they were experiencing, again, Hellenization, forced persecution. Let's turn everything pagan, and they're like, no, look to Daniel, look to like what did they do? And so these books that just keep inspiring new generations, that every time a new persecution comes, every time a new pressure comes to succumb to paganism, they revert back to those messages.
And if you compare the overall message of the book of Daniel and the book of Revelation, it's the same message exactly. God's people will suffer. Mm-hmm. God's people will be brutally persecuted, but they will be victorious. It's like almost like when you compare what Revelation says, what Daniel says, it's stunning. It's stunning how we're talking about almost the same thing. So listen, before Tupa asks perhaps the last question, I just want to say, Sandra, our wonderful Sandra, can you show yourself? You behind the scenes doing your magic. Our wonderful Sandra, big thanks goes to her. She will be sending you invitations with some partial scholarships available. We want you to join very much. Let's continue this fellowship at Israel Bible Center. Join our family. I think what she will send you will actually have a significant discount as part of that membership. Make sure to use this, okay? Don't let this opportunity pass by. Tupa, let's go to you for the last question of your choice.
I have one from chapter 1. So Swingo Ondons asks us, At the Revelation chapter 1, verse 10 reads, "By inspiration I came to be in the Lord's day." Which day was John referring as the Lord's day?
That's a great one. That's a great
That's
one.
a good one.
Pinchas, I almost feel like, do I like you or not? You want to go first?
You're gonna do this again, okay? Fun. Again, we can't break tradition, okay? Well, this is what we do. So, Yom Adonai, the day of the Lord. So a lot of people look at it, and so I know that in the Christian culture, the day of the Lord or Lord's Day is commonly referred to as Sunday, but that's a modern vernacular. That vernacular, of course, did not exist in the language of Revelation, and certainly did not exist in the first century because there was no such thing yet. It developed many, many years later. So when John is talking about being caught up in this sort of spiritual way and seeing his visions, I believe that he was caught into what the Hebrew Bible calls the day of the Lord. Okay, this is the prophetic day when God's vengeance is sort of poured out upon the world. It's when God takes things back into his hands and starts changing the world in the way he wants it to be. For a while he left the world to our devices, but now is his turn. And so the prophets always call this the day of the Lord. And I realize Lord's Day. So here you have the possessive kind of turn things around. Hebrew, Greek, things don't translate exactly always all in every way. But this is what we're talking about. Essentially, it's the prophetic.
Pinchas, you're terrible, man, because you just disappointed.
I know.
A great amount of people that were hoping that when you would say it's not Sunday, that you would say it's Shabbat.
Sorry, I disappointed everybody. Right. This went straight to the prophets.
Right,
terrible.
It's not about Sunday or Shabbat, which is
not about a day. Actually, it's about the moment of justice.
It's about God's action. Exactly. Yeah. But John was there when God had finished his work and restored his justice, and it's only through the lens of that day that you can actually see the history of God's redemptive history unveiled, apocalypse. Only from that point you could see that, you can understand.
Great question. I think that's a good question to wrap things up on.
Yeah,
it was all planned.
Great job. Great job too. A perfect question to wrap things up with. I just want to invite everybody to join Israel Bible Center. We would love to study with you. We'd love for you to study with us. As you can hear, we're very excited about this topic. Revelation is something near and dear to us. But there's a lot of other things that we're excited about. And if you want to just check out on the website just a list of courses, you will be amazed how much stuff we have. So there's a lot of courses that Ellie put together, some I put together, but we also have absolutely fantastic staff. I mean, I have the best co-workers. They're all brilliant, and the stuff that they produce is top notch. I get to work with them all the time, so I get to benefit firsthand from that. So I say to everyone, if this is the stuff that you find intriguing about, if you're hanging with me here for hours talking about this, you probably love it. So you're going to enjoy the experience. Check it out. Try it out. You will not be disappointed.
We guarantee it. That's for sure. Folks, come. We're waiting for you. Join the family, join the tribe, and we'll learn together. We'll love you a lot. Thank you for coming. Thank you for all these hearts. And I was so relieved that it's not only when the cat showed up at Tupa's table that the hearts went up, because
I saw all those hearts floating too. Yeah,
the cat people went up at that time.
The hearts are also for you too.
Thank you too.
Bye, guys. Thank you very much for being here.
Bye-bye.
What Bible do you read? And how do you know it's the right one? There's only one version of the Bible, right? It might surprise you to learn that Bible translations led to many versions of Holy Scripture. Long ago, translators interpreted the Hebrew Bible, ensuring it would be enjoyed in many languages. But when they encountered Hebrew words they didn't understand, translators relied on their individual cultural context and used different words with different meanings unrelated to the original ones. This led to Bible versions that lacked the full, beautiful, original explanations becoming part of our history. That's why when you join our online classes, you'll get back to the source of the original Hebrew Bible to uncover hidden meanings.
Get back to the source. Join our online course today, where the treasures of the authentic Bible await you.
Click on the link and register to start your biblical experience.